Okay, I'm back to hopefully finish off this painting in this session that I'm about to start. I've had a look at it from a distance overnight, looking at my rocks. I like this has a 3-dimension, like this is the side, this faces out and there's light hitting that section there. That makes me realize I need to add a little bit of light to a couple of the front or side facing planes on a few of these rocks. So not overdoing it, but just having some kind of light hitting this plane would be good. And I think I've identified perhaps this one and this. I will add some light to at the final stage of the painting. I wish this was a little bit lighter and softer than what I did it, but you know, I would not try to soften that. That's something I will live with, rather than run the risk of overworking something. So now I'm going to work on the rocks at the front, and these I'm going to just paint rather than use the credit card, I think, although I may do a little bit of scraping on some to match the kind of texture that's happening here. But rocks can be quite varied in texture in the same setting. Just to show you, because these are colours not in my normal palette, I've just put them in a little extra palette, but so that I know when I come back to this what colours will wear. I tend to just do something like this. So I've written Norfolk at the top because that was the painting that I first used these colours for recently, and it just helps me if I want to top up, that I'm topping up in the same spot. So this one's Sodalite blue to give that little bit of blueness to the grey. It's a nice cool grey. Now I'm conscious here, I've got this wave hitting the rock, so I don't want to have straight edges. I want a little bit of this colour to transition out as if the rock goes further in behind this wave. There's more. So I'm painting now, looking in more detail at my photo. So this rock here, the wave's hitting it and travelling over the rock. So in effect I'm doing like an underwash or a base. I quite like the look if I can manage it to leave it as if there's water running back down. So a little bit of positive and negative painting, not totally relying on the masking fluid that I put down before. I'm just going to come into a little bit warmer colour over here. Warmer on the flat of the rock, and you can see where that touched, it pulled out this gorgeous blue tone out of the grey. Back to the lunar blue. So I'm seeing this as a side of the rock, then there's a flat top of a rock, and you can see my strokes change where I can kind of see I've drawn a little bit of shape, in order that where you see little whites and highlights occur, just the white of the paper popping through, I'm hoping that some of that has a directional pull. This part's lighter, the top and the front side of this rock, and then it's very dark down in here, so I'll keep that in mind. This is almost like a first wash in effect, but this beauty that this is doing up here, I want to make sure I don't just cover that over. So even if that happens to be somewhere where it would be a really dark part of the rock, I will consider that and try to keep, try to save some of that. So I'm going to drop some dark. Sepia is not a colour that's normally in my palette. I've pulled it out as a slightly warmer dark tone, but I'm going to go back to mixing my normal dark of ultramarine blue and brown madder. So a lot of people would use burnt sienna instead of brown madder. I find this gives me a darker, redder kind of mix, less brown, more into a mauve than what burnt sienna would mix. So I'm trying now not to cover that whole first wash. I want some of these areas to be visible. So I've got a thicker, creamier pigment so that it stays where I put it. I'm just mixing it where I always mix my darks. I make sure there's not much water there. You can see it's glossy, wet pigment, even though it's been in the palette 2 weeks or more. Those are the colours I'm using the most of all the time and always topping up. But I like it to be a thick, creamy pigment so that it stays where I put it. And so this, remember I said, was dark on this front side, and this might be a little bit too mauve. I might have to add the grey or the sepia, so neutral tint or Jane's grey. I've been using Jane's grey in this painting rather than neutral tint. And I might come back just to a smaller brush that holds a little bit less water, just to sort of shape this a little bit. There's some white, some masking fluid, sorry, here is why there's some funny shapes happening. This is that little bit that I said was a little bit warmer. I still need some dark coming in, so because that was warmer, I've gone into the sepia as my warm of choice. Now this might be too blue, I feel like here. So I'm just going to, it is the lighter side of the rock though. That must be, and so I might let this nearly dry and then come back in with that, the dagger brush and just zigzag some fissures and cracks along this rock. I want to keep some of that blue showing that ties into the other colour of the rocks. If I feel like it's not got that same texture, I don't want the texture all over, but maybe it would be good on the lighter sides. So maybe I'll just drag a little bit of that blue down, and you know, I can just create maybe some variation in those shapes without going overboard. And see, now I've got a very clear front face and a top face, almost two top faces there, one angling backwards. I've got a lovely little light patch here, so I'll sorry, I start talking and then I get sidetracked. It's two totally different sides of your brain working. Okay, so I think that's fine for this stage. This one over here is yellow and warmish, so I'm coming in with a little bit of Naples yellow into that. It's got a haze of sea spray coming up, then maybe the lunar blue on the front of it. and I'll mingle some of that in a minute when the Naples yellow is a bit drier. We've got froth coming up here, but there's dark within that. The froth isn't solid where it meets the rock. So I'm looking now for a line or a stop point. So I'll tackle this section of rock in one hit and then come across a little bit there. So the lunar blue ended. Can't see whether that was rock, if it had a straight line, but in a lot of subjects, you know, a tree line at the back of a hill, things like that, it just, you know, where the sky comes down and then the land meets it, I always run the sky under the back mountain or under the tree line at the back, because it allows me to then not have too many dry lines against dry lines. A small rock here, small singular rock. So back to the lunar blue. I'm remembering each time what colours I did on the other rocks. I want to change and warm up the front. So a little bit of Naples. I'm mixing a little touch of Australian grey into that Naples. So this meets water, so sometimes it has a smooth edge, horizontal, and sometimes it's going to be broken depending on how much movement you want to indicate in the water. So that's different in each circumstance. That dark colour looks a little bit too purpley, so I'm just going to add one of the darker greys in, and I'm going to leave this side lighter as though it's reflecting light. I can see in the photo it appears lighter to me in some of these sort of triangular volcanic shapes. Again, sort of a warmth on one side and a coolness elsewhere. So if I'm putting warm and cool down as an underwash like that, I always let them bleed into each other. I'm not worried here about making green. I mentioned that up here because I had such a strong blue and I was putting the yellow on over the top. When I put them down next to each other and they just bleed in, you don't really get green as such, like if you were glazing blue over yellow and vice versa. They're just next to each other and they'll bleed. Yeah, you know, it might change slightly greenish, but it's not enough that it would cause a problem. So I'll let that set a little bit. I'll come back, just keep an eye on this one. Think, do I want any lights lifted out? This is probably not quite dry enough to do that with my fingernail. It'll run straight back in. I can test whether it's ready for the fishes and see how much it's spread. That means it's too wet still to hold its line. But I don't want them to be really detailed on here, so this might look too yellow. Sorry, I'm telling you my whole thought process. Put me on fast forward and silent if you don't need so much information. That was just a little bit too yellow. I want the warm tone to shine through the grey, but not be as pale and yellow as that looked. So I did, while it's damp, just drop some grey into it and see again how glossy and shiny it is. So this is at a stage here, hopefully you can see on the camera. Oh no, I hope that hasn't been off. That's been off camera the whole time. That's a shame. I'll have to talk you through the next step. I'm so disappointed that was off camera. So I've got my first wash on this one, nearly drying, still shiny, still glossy. So it's at a good time for me to come in with that thicker pigment, like a Vegemite or a butter consistency. It's a smaller rock, so I might just change down a brush. And the reason I'm doing that isn't for a smaller amount of hair or for a smaller brush. It's for a brush that holds less moisture. My weasel hair ones, I have no issue at all with the size of the brush for this size work. It's more that I want to make sure I've got less moisture as I come back in and build this up. Oh, look at that gorgeous saturated purple. And you can see the brown matter is a little bit more dominant at the bottom. I remixed, I mixed more colour, and that's why it was slightly different. I'll just put some more brown matter into it, but I'm not necessarily going to blot that off or pick up the paint. I quite like variation in colour. Sometimes I feel like my work looks a little bit rainbow, but that appeals to me. So, or when it dries, I sometimes do think, oh, you know, that's not going to work out, I've got too many different colours, and then it dries and it looks beautiful, and I think, oh, I'm glad I didn't overwork that or change from what oh, that's water there. So this is when I would blot, because I've gone into what is my water between the two rocks. So I want to take that moisture off. And so I'm just adding a little touch of grey over that yellow because it's a little bit too light. I could come in, you know, I mean, Lunar Earth is a bit crazy strong, but it does really nice. It does really nice things. So maybe let's just add a little bit of that into the warm side. So I'm thinking about the edges and going, okay, that actually needs to be more varied. I don't want it as much of a straight line as what it appears. And so one of the few times I washed the brush there was because I'm going from an orange into a blue. And so I would definitely wash my brush, but usually at this stage of painting, because I want to make sure I'm not adding unnecessarily water, I will try not to wash the brush much. So I'm looking at the shapes and the crevices and the cracks in my photo. And just getting a base of those shapes down. In my head I'm going, look at that gorgeous, gorgeous blue. But at the same time I'm thinking, is it too much? And I think just a little bit of Jane's Grey dropped into it. Not totally covering it, but just breaking it up is a good idea. So this is ready pretty much to just leave to dry a little bit more and then come in with the cracks and crevices. So I can come into this one just in front. If I touch against that, that pigment will run down a little bit. So when you see this purpley colour, that's my mix of brown madder and ultra blue. And when I come in with a more grey, it's Jane's grey or sepia. I've got another rock there. Remember I said I'm not doing this until that dries because I don't want to disturb that. And you see me doing these ones that are touching here. It's because they're all linked and I do want them to soften in together and not be as definite in the change of plane or rock. I don't want a whole pile of little dotted over rocks. And I know I can come back and just get that little bit of highlight back with my fingernail lifting out, or I can do a little white gouache or some kind of highlight across the top if I want to later when it's dry. And so see how much they're holding their shape in comparison to here, because my paper is dry. And so I'll make sure some of them are thicker, but they're not all the same. They're not all the same width and style of line. I can come back later though and darken up a few shadow areas if I want to. I think it needs it to set one rock in behind or to describe a plane that's moving away from us. Like I feel like a little bit of shadow in this V would be good, perhaps over in this corner, something in there just to sharpen up this edge. This is still very damp, so it's softening in. I think I might lift out a little highlight along here. And this is really about timing. If you do this and the pigment runs back in, it means it's too early. There's a lovely little bit of rock being seen through the water here, I think, in my photo, so I'll just pop that dark in while I see it. Oh, and I know what I did. So here I lifted those couple of bits out. Maybe that's what I should do as well, just so there's that little bit of similar texture. So I depart with my fingernail and I'm overlapping that, which is not great. This one's nearly dry, so it won't probably lift now. Oh, nice. Okay, so you missed this part on camera, I think. I haven't had a proper look, but it just looked like it was low and off camera. So, and you know, like a lot of people would just hit that with a hairdryer and keep working. I'm not a massive fan of the hairdryer. I feel like it just does something to the paper. Aside from drying it, I feel like it gets kind of stiffer, and it's my last resort. Like if it was getting onto 5-6 o'clock at night in the studio and it's winter and I want to just pop some masts on a boat painting or something and it's not dry enough, then I will perhaps, then I can, you know, sometimes I'll hit that with the hairdryer, but I would rather move along to a different area of the painting than use the dryer on it. Actually, here's my rock shape up there. I feel like because of the time, if I wasn't talking on video, I would just come across here, but I don't like teaching that because I find a lot of people don't work as wet as I do, so that would have dried past the working point while they're off doing this other area, where mine is quite wet and I could perhaps take half an hour adding pigment in, not being in a rush, just taking my time, because I know that first wash was really damp. So again, let those touch and mingle. Nothing looks more artificial than when they put next to each other with a gap or left to dry. Left to dry one solid next to the other. The underwash needs to bleed and be subtle. So this is adding some warmth. There's like these little grey rocks here. Not fussed on that shape, how it interacts with the other one. So what I might do is add that rock in afterwards. So, and a little bit smaller, so it just sits in close as if it's just in front of this. So not loving this shape of that big V. I feel like I've got a volcano. And now I'm keeping an eye as well on what this one's doing. And it looks pretty damp still, but let's go into our darker. So see how the pigment needs to be thicker. It's damp, it needs to be thicker for it to just sit where I put it. It frays out and it softens, but it stays put. Oh, I actually missed that. That should have been a whole nother width deep. So let's get more of this happening here, as if that's this. I'll come back and I'll show you how to soften those lines into each other. That's a tiny, tiny bit too damp for me to want to do it. But I don't really have a choice because I messed that up. But like I would always say to students, nobody else is looking at this photo. So I should have just ignored that. Nobody else is looking at this photo or knowing this rock formation back to front, roundabout. So if I didn't have it exact, it really would not matter. So I'm popping in some dark, just quite loose and liberal at the moment, because remember I built it up over that yellow and the blue so that we just see some small areas of it. There's a really good crack along there. Okay, so before this dries with a line, I'm a turner of my painting. And so I wash my brush, I clean, I don't go like, I see a lot in class people go, I don't want that much moisture taken out of it. But I wash it, I have paper towel sitting next to my water well, just to make sure you can see that. I have paper towel sitting next to my water well. So I've washed the brush, I'll do that, and then I'll actually do that because I can feel then how much moisture is in the brush. If I'm squeezing with the paper towel, I pretty much know I'm going to get it too dry, but I also can't actually feel the moisture. And I just will soften by just coming along that line. If this was 100% dry, I'd hit it with the blow dryer. I really wouldn't have to be this careful. I could just come along with a damp brush and wet over the other. So I'll just watch it for a little bit too as it's drying, and if I see some cauliflowers forming or something I don't like, I'll add to that. I'll correct it. So I've got to keep an eye on this one as well. I don't want that to dry. I don't want this solid line that I've created there. But I don't mind that lightness that's happening here and there through that. I've got to link these two areas so it's coming back to the colours and the lines and the shapes, and actually I think I use sepia up there a little bit, so let me bring in some sepia and connect those. So coming across the top, what is a flat part of the top of the rock, I'm adding a little touch of sepia or Jane's grey into my light areas. My purple's too purple, sorry, my dark colour here is too purple. So I'm just going to add some grey on top here as well. I feel like it's too purple. And I've got this shape of rock coming away but more rounded. Okay, so that's probably a good stage where I need to come across now and just look at this one before it dries. Start to put some of the dark shapes in. There's lots of V's and sharp angles on this rock. To make it blend in and have some similarity, I will put a little bit of that dark mix that's mauve into it. And can you see then also I'm trying to not always have the same brush stroke, so I think that's part of the thing that's hardest when you're starting out. You often use the brush in the same way all the time, and so you get the same shapes that your brush will put down. Where I go from being up on the tip to down on the belly, putting it down flat, this way, that way. I need to darken up some of this. It's too triangular, I feel like, and still too light over here, so I've got to get a little bit of this grey in on top of what I am still leaving as the lighter sections. Always make sure your strokes come off the edge of your paper as well, otherwise when you frame it you've got to lose even more of the paper, and sometimes if a stroke doesn't fully go to the edge you've got a light section where you don't necessarily want a light section to draw your eye. So I'm just slowly building up these darks. I feel like this looks like a totally different type of rock. I've got flat square ones here, but this is very triangular and jagged, but I've got to think, does that go with my painting? And I actually don't feel like it does. So what I might do is actually ignore my photo for a few minutes and paint a bit intuitively. So on this part I didn't use the credit card or lift anything out, but I might, to match these others, just do a little bit. Again, it's just coming back to get that texture of how it sort of pushes the darks. These are going to be dark, so I do need to be careful not to lift out too much. Letting this one dry. So see now how glossy that is. I've added like the second layer of paint, wet into wet. It's got a beautiful sheen. So I know I can leave that. This one's losing its sheen, so it's time to come back and do the brushwork, the mark making. So I'm thinking about vertical, where I'm going upper side plane, slightly diagonal, but thinking almost horizontal on what I want to indicate is a flat plane. And then down the bit that I'm saying falls off. So it's almost step, step, step I want to create. I wonder what would happen. That was dangerous. The tip of my brush still in my hand. So remember, when you're doing that with a card, you are damaging the paper, so you don't have many options of painting more into it later. There's a really lovely crack along here. I probably will reinforce it when it's dry. And maybe just to get this a bit more definite where the edge of this one is, I'll use the card. But then still blend that crack wise. I've got three shapes nearly the same there, so just soften one of those out. Oops, I had to re-wet the brush because next to nothing was coming off, and I've got too much water. So did you see how that just spread much more, but it's got a lovely depth to it, so I'll just leave it and see what it does. So now I'm conscious. I went back to looking at my photo. I'm going to try and not paint that as it is. So what I might do actually is a bit of this lifting here, just in order to change the planes that I've drawn. So think cracks and crevices rather than outlines when you're doing this kind of line work. It can be like that to reinforce a shadow. So when I want to do that, I lay more the belly of the brush down so that more pigment comes off. But I'm consciously trying not to outline my rocks. If something feels a little bit dark, when it goes on, just pressing it with your finger. I'll speed the video up at some point because I think it's just the same.
I don't like the shape of those two sort of mirroring each other. If I dampen that, it'll come back together, but I quite like what it's doing at the moment. I've just got this step thing happening, but I don't think it looks very good for over that side of the media right off there. I've got a dark against a really light patch, so what I might do.
Remember, there's something here in my photo that connects these two bits of rock, but I don't really like the shape there as much. So when this is dry, I will put a little bit of grey in here to just suggest another rock. So now it's time probably to look back at my water, and I'm just kind of thinking about what I might do. I'm going to stop for lunch, let this dry, and then come back to it. This is nearly dry here, so a good time to just add a little bit more of this scumbling brushwork. And again, that pressure down on the brush, this is part of why I like this instead of just a script liner, is you get a more random mark, and so making sure you've got some fat and thin bits is good, not all the same width of line all around. So now I'm just looking at my water. I'm sorry I said that, but then I realised just this little bit of rock. Just because I've got the pencil there, which can't be erased because well, most likely can't be erased. I did a little wash there and then pressed it out, so usually that will hold the pencil. Okay, so in thinking about the water, I want to do as little as possible is my goal. But the white, you know, it's not just pure white. It has shadow. So I've just got to bring in some really pale. I want some really pale colour. I'm going to pat that just like I just want that softer. I've just added a little touch of cerulean into that mix of mauve. I want to make sure it links up in some places as if the shape tucks behind the rocks. So see this white passage here? That's really not nice compositionally, so I'll continue this line out through there. The reason it isn't great is that it just creates this passage where the shape follows the dark shape there, and your eye would follow that a little bit more than what I intend. So hopefully the cerulean will look like frothy white, not like as if I intended that as watercolour, as the colour of water, sorry, not watercolour, because obviously I'm painting in watercolour. And the same with the mauve. We want it to look a bit shadowed in places. And so this is a mix of cobalt and alizarin crimson. I've already put some colour there. I think just a little touch more here and there. And I've got to get most of this on before I take the masking fluid off. And I need to do more looking than painting, so you know it's really important to actually take the time to just look at what you've created or painted, and rather than just jumping in and painting everywhere. For the white froth to look white and frothy, it needs shadow. And if I get this too solid in places, then I'll flick some white gouache in after I take the masking fluid off. And I can see again that there's masking fluid there, but there's no colour. So if there's no colour, it's just going to be a large white section when I take the masking off. So just this little suggestion of almost iridescent blue is what I'm trying to create. There's a real dark sort of colour happening in here where perhaps the rock is bigger in behind the splash. Same up here, I've got this large area of white gouache, oh sorry, not white gouache, large area of masking fluid, but I've not got anything filling the gaps around it. So a little bit of that blue mix. And so that's got to be 100% dry before I rub that off, otherwise all that happens is I smear it onto my fingers. I feel like there needs to be more over here. Like if I'm looking at my photo, what I tried to do in that first wash was the shapes that were darker, but you can see the white isn't white. It's shadowed bluish, it's yellowish there, golden. Just a hint of a tint of colour, a hint of a tint. So there is still some white. I don't want to totally cover it all up. What I'm consciously thinking about though is that this is a second wash. Those shapes that I put on there are wash number 1. I don't want to have to do a third wash. If I add more a third time, I need to do it as just mark making calligraphy strokes. I'm just putting a touch of yellow up in here to get that late afternoon glow. And I can see that again, perhaps about there. I need to look at that now once I take the masking fluid off to make any further decisions, I think. I'm going to just lighten up those couple of spots that I said earlier that I would like to see lighter. So I'm putting up fresh white gouache. I don't like it once it's dried. So I usually get it out each time I need it. I've got a little touch of maybe Indian yellow or something happening over there. No, I don't like that. What's this one? Konekon and gold maybe? Okay, this is going to be better. I don't know whether that's on camera. I'm trying to avoid touching into that purple. What I want is that late afternoon golden light, which kind of doesn't look like white highlights, but it looks peachy. So I've just added a little bit of cad red orange, and I'm looking for some cad yellow, which I don't have out clean. I'm playing with fire doing this right next to that mauve because I want it to be fresh and light, and I don't want to put this on quite so wet as that. So I'm using a paper towel to take the majority of thick pigment off the brush, and then I just will put down, I want a little touch more orange, so I've just picked that up from the corner. I remember I said there were just a couple of places where I felt the front, I could make a little bit more of a front sunlit plane, like here, imagining that some of these are facing the front, and then I've got a side. And so this is something I wouldn't do much before I actually put it at the end of my studio and look from a distance. So that's probably as much as I would do without looking at it from a distance. You can't judge this up close, and I want to be really, really careful not to overdo it, but I just wanted a couple that look more sort of sunlit on the same plane that this piece is here. What I would do to emphasize that as well is some of these need a shadow. Like, remember we put the mauve shadow up here. So to get more of a side plane on some of these rocks, I'm going to just lay a bit of shadow . I'm cautious, so I don't want to lose my beautiful change of tones, so I'm not going to go over that lovely reddy colour there. I want this one to come forward like it did in my photo. Maybe this as well could be side view. So what I'm doing is making one plane of the rock more obviously side on and in shadow. And you can see how much that softened in the mauve when I first put it on. I think I said to you, some of you are going to be thinking that it looked crazy bright blue. And if you have an area like this that's a bit flat and needs a bit of life added to it, then running that nearly pure saturated ultramarine blue on the top will be good for that. Okay, so I'm going to put this at the end of my studio and have a look and see whether I'm happy with those rocks. This one here might be just a little bit too bright. So I've taken most of the masking fluid I've taken off with this little piece of shoe rubber. It just helps to not rub your fingerprints off. So I've still got a little bit in there because you might notice I splattered some paint in that area and it's not fully dry. So I'm going to start up here. One of my pet peeves is when masking fluid is taken off and just left in that form, because it actually has some really ugly edges, and so I quite like to just refine that a little bit, and I think it's important to the finished look of your painting. So I do add a little bit of white gouache to shape the start and finish of some of the marks that I've left out. So I've got fresh white gouache. I don't use it if it's dried because I want it to be thick and basically straight from the tube. So I will just refine sometimes how the white at the edge of the masking fluid starts. I might add some more little channels of water coming down as if the wave has dropped. See, this is really thick, ugly mark making to me, so it just needs a bit of refining. I prefer the look of white gouache usually. And so where I had masked out a wave, again, like we said here, the white of the water isn't pure white. So in this wave as well, it would have some shadow happening. So once I take that masking fluid off, I've got to add some shadow for that to look like a wave. And I think I said earlier my mauve mix is cobalt blue and alizarin crimson, sometimes a little touch of Naples yellow, and if I want it darker or stronger, I'll use ultramarine blue instead of the cobalt. So if this is in shadow, of course this would be in shadow as well. So realistically, I've just added that white gouache, but I'm going to drop my shadow mauve over the top, because if you can picture the light's hitting there, this is what I decided was my shadow side of my waves, shadow side of my rocks, sorry. I put shadow here into the water, so the water coming down the rocks on this side in particular would be in shadow. And sometimes, you know, masking fluid will land like that in a drop, in a blob that's too big, so I can't fully integrate it into the rock behind it, but I can shape it a little bit by putting some dark or some other colour there, just to break it up if it's too much, if it's too big a shape. So sometimes I'll think I've gotten all the masking fluid off, then I'll see something. You can come back into the rock colour and add a little bit of, like as if we're looking through the water into the rocks. This is two triangular sharp shapes, so I want to bring that rock down into that just a little bit more to break up that white there. So I'm switching in between a light and a dark realistically now. This is too big a white shape, but you can see it helped me to paint more freely by having it there, and it helps me get these uneven shapes. So I did a lot of flicking of the masking fluid. This just actually looks a bit messy in here. The white gouache. And thinking about the direction that the water is traveling, masking fluid is like the gift that keeps on giving. It feels like you just never fully get it off. Okay, so now my other technique now with the white gouache is to splatter a little bit within this. So I've got too big a shape there. White, see this big white shape? That doesn't read like anything in particular, so I need to break up that shape. Along here as well, needs some choppiness in that where the wave's hitting the rock. Of course it wouldn't be all white. I'm darkening here so that this looks like this wave really comes up there, so I feel like it needs to be darker out from it. And now if I'm splattering with a colour or with white, I want to cover up everything that I don't want to have the white splatter on. And so I want a little bit more up here on the rock. So I hit the brush, hold the brush just above where I want the colour, and then I tap it. You can also tap it onto your finger, but I feel like I've got less control when I do that to when I do this. So I just want all those little white. Happy if I get a few long ones as well, because that's actually what the wave does. So I'm splattering this back into where I put some of the dark colour in here so that there's white. And you will still be able to see this on top of the paper. You know, white gouache does sit on top rather than look like the white of the paper. You can tell that it's been added, but that doesn't bother me. I quite like the look of the white gouache. Much more than I like the masking fluid. But if you wet it, if you add too much water to it, it just goes a bit milky and isn't very successful. I need to work on this bit here. Oh, I wanted a little bit more of that just along here. Okay, then go back to the Lunar Blue. I've got some shapes here that I'm not madly a fan of. And down here, let's make this more definite rock with a little bit of water running down. And if you see like straight lines like that and this little bit here, that's where I would add some little touches of dark rock colour, as if the froth is thinner and more broken at that stage, at that spot. Remember I added some little bits up there as well to indicate that there's rock in behind that splatter. I'm going to splatter a little bit more. Actually, I need to wait for it to dry because I want to splatter a little bit more darker colour down in here and maybe up through there in a minute. So I'm just getting a little bit more white gouache in there first. But I need that to dry, because if I splatter the dark while the white gouache is wet, it'll just mix and make an opaque mess, really. I very rarely bring white gouache out through here. It looks too artificial, but if there's something I need to get a little sparkle or a reshape, I'll just do, you know, a few little lines. I would never dampen it down and try and get a white sparkle back, but I would work just in these little shapes of colour. This needs to look like a rivulet of water. So I've stopped at this point. I'm going to have a look at the painting overnight or for a couple of days. I think since you last saw me, I just added some splatters here of the darker colour, and that's about all. So I really need to look at it overnight, and see whether there's anything else that I think I would do. So thanks for spending this time with me. If you've got any questions, drop them in the chat and I'll get back to you. Thanks, bye.